Now, this is very likely going to be the rhetoric that is used to push vaccines on your kids, especially with this upcoming school year. A vaccine to obviously fight influenza, or perhaps an experimental vaccine to fight this as yet undiagnosed virus. But unless you read your vaccine insert, you're not going to know the damage that vaccines can potentially do to your children. And you're definitely not going to hear it from the government unless you know how to read between the lines. Now, here is how the U.S. government admits vaccines cause autism. The extensive article is at childhealthsafety.wordpress.com, but it's titled, "Vaccines Did Not Save Us." Halfway through the piece, you're linked to an email from Tina Cheatham at the U.S. Health Resources Services Administration, and she's writing to CBS reporter Cheryl Atkinson. Now, the email concerns the conditions under which the federal government will pay out compensation to parents whose children have been damaged by vaccines. They say, the government has never compensated, nor has it ever been ordered to compensate any case based on a determination that autism was actually caused by vaccines. We have compensated cases in which children exhibited encephalopathy, maybe accompanied by a medical progression of an array of symptoms, including autistic behavior, autism, or seizures. That's official wordplay at work. Compensation for vaccine-induced autism? No. But compensation for vaccine-induced encephalopathy, accompanied by symptoms that are much like autistic behavior? Yes. Here we point out, shuffle the words, shuffle the disease labels, and protect the vaccines. That's what they must do, protect the vaccines. Any sane person can see that the government has in fact admitted that vaccines cause autism, which John Rappaport points out in this article. When you translate that, it means vaccines damage brains, regardless of what you call. That is a tragedy and a crime. Now, a new paper that has just been released by Princeton professor Dr. Samuel Wang makes it pretty clear that the case for early childhood brain damage could be the cause for autism. Now, Wang speculates that damage to the cerebellum could be causing autism, and that it could be caused in the womb or in early childhood. The cerebellum is responsible for helping young minds process complex sensory information, which over time eventually will lead them to form normal social relationships, like responding to a parent's smiling face, for instance. Now, while Dr. Wang and his co-authors don't completely rule out injury during a child's early life as a possible root of this disorder, they feel it's more likely an injury that's been suffered in the womb that is the cause. They say there is certainly the possibility of postnatal risks, but to my knowledge, the evidence for this is weak and can usually be explained by some prenatal event. But let's take into account that everyone that is on this earth has been in the womb at some point or another, and autism is a relatively new disorder that coincides with the rise in vaccines. So basically, 2 + 2 = 4 here, right? Vaccines are known to damage the brain. The government basically admits as much. Perhaps that's why they are trying to teach us that 2 + 2 = 5, so we won't be able to put 2 and 2 together. Now, there's going to be more coming up after this, but first, Dr. Andrew Wakefeild joined the Alex Jones Show yesterday to break down even further this whistleblower information about the CDC vaccine cover-up. Stay with us.
This has been a momentous couple of weeks. I don't remember anything quite like it in the last 20 years. But just to back up a little bit, the first study we did was on the MMR vaccine back in 1998. And that was a vaccine, a live viral vaccine that parents had linked to autism. It did not have thimerosal in, but many of the other vaccines, particularly those in use in this country, did have thimerosal, the mercury preservative. That had been implicated in neurodevelopmental disorders over here. And we think, as you pointed out, that these things are interacting with each other to potentiate the risk. But just in the last 2 weeks, and great credit to Brian Hooker, Dr. Brian Hooker, who brought this whistleblower out, Dr. William Thompson, a senior scientist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has come forward and admitted to 13 years of fraud and cover-up of the link between MMR vaccine and autism.
Because of a tortured conscience.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is epic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, he did that. And he raised these concerns way back in 2001, 2002. He went right to the top of the CDC, to Julie Gerberding, who, as you well know, went straight from the CDC to become head of vaccines at Merck.
So he's been a tortured soul for 14 years, worried about this.
Yes, he has. And he finally came forward to Dr. Hooker, and he really spilled his heart out and told him the truth about what had happened. They had tested the hypothesis, the idea that the younger age of exposure that you got the MMR, the greater the risk of autism. That makes sense, because when you get natural measles, if you get it under 1, then the outcome is likely to be worse than if you get it over 1. So we see this with natural infection. In fact, we put that idea forward to the CDC back in 2000, 2001. So they tested that idea, and they showed that it was correct. They spent the next 3 years working out how to get rid of that effect, so that they didn't have to admit to the fact that MMR vaccine was, in fact, for some children, not safe.
How is the media so controlled that this vindicating information that could save tens of millions of children's brains, with autism going from 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 68 now, just epidemic, how could this not be national news?
It is extraordinary, isn't it, how much the media is controlled, is owned by, I believe, their sponsors and influence from the government. It is incredible. I mean, what Dr. Thompson described, and let me just give you the context here. If this were a money laundering ring, Dr. Thompson would be the accountant. He is the man with the numbers. He did the analysis. He knows. So he is the key guy. And when he comes forward and says this, then you better take it very...
He's the comptroller, the kingpin.
Absolutely.
This isn't some low level. This is like the guy that saw the BS.
Absolutely. He saw it. He pointed it out. He pointed out to the highest level in the CDC. And instead of being acted upon, he was disciplined instead. So that is...
As you were.
Exactly. That seems to be the modus operandi if you come forward with concerns about vaccine safety.
How dare you not want to have millions of brain damaged children on your hands?
Yeah.
That's...
And it's even more insidious than that, Alex, because what he found, as the alternative media have reported, is that the effect was driven by a very high risk in black boys. Why that was, we don't know. Why particularly black boys? Is that a genetic component to the risk? We don't know. But I said to him, what do these data say? Are they telling us that actually MMR vaccine is a risk for autism per se, and that younger age of exposure is a particular risk in the African-American male population? He said, absolutely.
As more whistleblowers come out, as just happened this week with another, they're all going to prison if this ever comes out. I mean, just like 5 years ago, they would say, don't give a pregnant woman any vaccines. Now they say pregnant women need more. It's well known it causes problems with the fetus. So their answer is just say, no, it's like pumpkin pie. There just seems to be a Hitlerian commitment to this.
There is. It's almost like a religion. It's the first thing that happens is if you question vaccine safety, then you're put in a corner and said, people say you're anti-vaccine, that you clearly can't be listened to because you're not talking science. That's just a convenient way of dismissing.
I wish there was a vaccine for all this different stuff. I want to be healthy. I want my kids to be protected from tetanus and stuff. I mean, it's just the problem is they have a huge history of tetanus shots full of problems.
Yeah, it raises another issue, Alex, and that is the problem, for example, with MMR, because it's 3 viruses in one vaccine. If you gave them separately, would you have less of a problem? And we didn't see this issue when we had the single measles vaccine. That's something I've always advocated. Give parents the choice of single vaccines. And you know what happened in the UK when I suggested that. 6 months later, they took away the choice of single vaccine.
They got upset because it showed you were right.
Well, they said we need to protect the vaccine policy rather than the children. That was the net effect of what they said. So we'll take away the choice of single vaccines. Our emphasis is not necessarily to protect children from infectious disease, but to protect our vaccine policy. This is a story that came from a senior member of the Department of Health.
How can they defeat parents who have a child that was happy and healthy after vaccines that's brain damaged? How do they ever think they're going to get away with this? As the damage mounts, they're only going to create more opposition. Don't they get it's a losing battle?
They don't. I think they're beginning to now because they are losing so badly. They've spent billions of dollars, billions of pounds on expensive public relations campaigns, and they are losing. They are losing the hearts and minds of the public. Why? Because it is true. Not because I say so, not because Jenny McCarthy says so, but because they see it in their own streets.
Their own top scientists said they were ordered to cover it up.
That's exactly right. So now the whole house of cards is going to fall. And the other thing that came out recently on Friday, I was mentioning it, that Steve Kralin, a scientist working in the MMR vaccine lab of Merck, reported fraud in that laboratory, overestimating the the effectiveness of the mumps vaccine.
They understand, hey, we're hurting people. We better talk about it. These are heroes for doing the right thing.
That's right. So their mumps vaccine was not working. We were seeing outbreaks of mumps in highly vaccinated populations around the world. And so they were told by the FDA, either you prove what it says on your product insert, 96% protection, or you lose your license. Now, you lose a license for mumps, you lose the license for MMR, and Merck have got a monopoly in this country, and that's a lot of money. So they set about trying to fix the test, not the vaccine. They had two options. They could act in the children's interests, or they could act in Merck interests. And what they did, apparently, is to act in Merck's interests and fix the test. So what they did to the test is to add rabbit's blood to it.
Unbelievable.
Rabbit's blood, absolutely nothing to do with the ability of the mumps vaccine to protect children, but add rabbit's blood.
Is that because the rabbits have an immunity?
No, it's because it falsely elevates the protection of the apparent protection of the vaccine, doing it at all. It's an artifact. It's a lab effect. It's nothing to do with immunity at all. So when they did that, it worked. But what they did...
So they engaged in fraud.
Engaged in fraud. They asked him to fix his data. They asked him to cross out what he'd written before, write some new numbers, which convinced the FDA that the vaccine was right. He took them to a whistleblower court. He filed a case, took it to court. And the good news is that Merck, having tried to have it thrown out of court, have just on Friday lost that case, and it will proceed to trial. And so for everybody, that is very, very good news, because what it will eventually do is bring out the truth about the efficacy and safety of that vaccine, and I believe lead to the demise of the MMR vaccine as it currently is. That is not that it will get rid of single vaccine. Maybe we should go back to single vaccines because they're protective, but mumps vaccine was never needed. And this is the important point. This comes not from me, but from Donald Henderson, who was head of the smallpox eradication program at the CDC. He said it wasn't needed. They did a study when it first was introduced. They said, we don't need this vaccine. And it slowly appeared on down. Here's the fascinating, I'll tell you a story about this. They did a study. The vaccine wasn't needed. They said to Morris Hillerman of Merck, we don't need this. So he went state by state by state, persuading health officials to introduce it. In the end, so many states were using it that the CDC said, in Donald Henderson's words, oh, to hell with it. We might as well put it on the schedule. That's the scientific basis for the use of mandatory mumps vaccination in this country. From the man himself, Dr. Donald Henderson, oh, to hell with it.